Looking back, it would be one of the highlights in my life because I've always loved to hitch my wagon to a star. And I think nothing should pull one down, but if you can be elevated, it's good. And Pikedale has always stood in my mind as one of the most beautiful experiences in my life.
Pikedale had a strange effect on my life. I must admit the years there were the happiest days I've ever experienced. But I suppose nothing was ever able to live up to the Pikedale days. I was so involved with the place, the river, the trees, the stones, the house. It was just all so much part of me that to leave it was very empty. And I don't think I'll ever be able to find a lifestyle that was as wonderful.
Late in 1981, Gold Coast cinematographer Jerry Williams was browsing through another junk shop, looking for old cameras to add to his collection on photographic history. His attention was attracted by a box of old 16mm film that had been salvaged from a local tip, still in the original packets dating back to 1926, and amazingly, still in perfect condition. Curious, he took them home, and as the rolls unwound before him, Jerry's curiosity changed to excitement. The people and the places in the home movies reached out to him across the years, and he had to know more about them and to tell their story. Two names on the packets were his only link with that past, Rogerson and Pikedale, and they began Jerry on a 12-month quest through phone books and records, a quest that ended when a woman rang from Sydney after hearing a radio report about his search. Now in her 80s, Mrs. Margaret Pope was one of the young women in the films. Her name had been Rogerson, and she had lived at Pikedale. When Fanny married Arthur Rogerson, she knew of her husband's commitment to the land. He was born to it and was determined that with hard work he would meet its demands and claim his rewards. Fanny possessed an inner strength equal to her husband's. She bore him 5 children: John, Colin, Margaret, Helen, and Nancy. Together they built their life on the land, first in the sheeplands of New South Wales, then later taking their flocks into the harsh country of Western Queensland, where they knew the heartbreak of drought. Arthur saved their sheep by moving them east, where in 1918, just outside Stanthorpe, the family became the Rogersons of Pikedale. Covering 50,000 acres of prime grazing country, Pikedale was already world famous for the quality of its fleece. Arthur Rogerson and his sons were to build on that reputation. Fanny was to build a home and a way of life that would affect all they touched.
Mum was one of the Rogerson girls, and so obviously because of this, I just belonged here too. They always came back at every possible opportunity. It was a very drawing sort of a place, and so from the moment I was born, I was here. I thought that's all there was to it.
Well, it was like this. It was in the spring of 1928. I went to Pikedale at Stanthorpe. I knew Nancy Rogerson in Sydney, and she invited me to visit her home and meet the family. Well, you didn't go off in a casual fashion in those days. You waited for the mother to send you the written invitation, which arrived very formally, inviting me to come. And in that spring, if I remember, there were apple blossoms and on the way in beautiful, very beautiful country. I was met, of course, by the eldest son, John, who was tall and fine-looking with a big black bushy moustache and big slouch hat and long skinny legs I can see in those polished boots. And off we set. Well, to my amazement, we didn't drive up to the homestead. When we got there, it had been raining, flooding, and we went in a small boat across. And there, in front of this sort of gone-with-the-wind mansion, to my mind, I'd been used to country homesteads, low-lying with broad, low verandas. 2 stories and I think an iron balconies, but we're all covered with roses, roses in full bloom. I'm there to meet one with all the family. Rather austere at first, hiding very kind hearts and a wonderful welcome. So that's how I arrived at Pikedale.
In my day, I would say there were 11 or 12 men about the property, some boundary riders. There were 3 or 4 cottages at ends of the place, and a few that lived within the house. Often the jackaroo and the overseer were within the house. And they ran, I think they all regarded it as home. You know, they loved the place, and they had nice little cottages, and their children grew up there, and it was a very family affair, the workers on the place. They all had great respect for my uncles. They were always Mr. John and Mr. Colin, and but they, you know, they were in the work too. My uncles, they definitely were part of what was going on. They didn't stand on the veranda and give orders and then send the men off. Whatever was going, they were all involved with branding or dipping or drenching or whatever.
There was a rigidness, a hard working. You never saw anyone lolling about. You never saw any, the boots were changed, the boots were polished, always the ties, the vests, and always an alertness that appealed to one.
They were always in their tie and waistcoat. That was all there was to it. Maybe very, very hot summer's day, the old waistcoat came off, but I don't think the tie ever did. And I think that was just a family tradition. It was pretty obvious with my 2 uncles. I think my grandfather was really without a coat on top of the waistcoat. And the old leggings, you know, they didn't go out without being totally dressed.
Education for the Rogerson offspring, boys and girls, meant Sydney boarding schools, where friendships and outlook could be broadened, along with learning the 3 R's. Perhaps in those days, the oldest daughter, Margaret, heard the embryonic whispers of feminism, but on Pikedale there was already a raw equality.
We took part in everything that was going on the place, as well as doing our bit in the house. We were there to lend a hand when necessary. And if you could ride well, you'd get a job mustering and that sort of thing. Say shearing time, we took messages. We were ready to go out and put sheep in various paddocks when they were shorn, and help dipping and all that sort of thing. A little bit of everything.
In my day, I was very much involved. Anything I wanted to do, I could do. I was mustering at shearing time, counting the sheep in the sheds. Little girl always was counting the sheep in, standing by whoever he was, a shed boss, I suppose, and counting sheep in and out, putting them on the little ledger thing. That was great. But I ploughed and, you know, whatever, mended fences, whatever was going, I was certainly involved in then. And I think the whole place has been like that always. Man and woman, they all joined in with everything. It was part of this togetherness and part of this total feeling of family that they all had.
We were sufficient unto ourselves. We didn't need people to come in from outside at all. We made all our own fun with our tennis and great ping pong tournaments and billiards. It wasn't necessary to have people in from outside.
The thing that I remember most, I think, is this feeling of so many of us all belonging together. The extended family, I suppose you could call it. We all came back, parents, children, you know, nearly dogs and cats more or less when anything was going, Christmas times, special occasions. Everyone that could possibly get here got here. I think my grandmother was rather a matriarchal figure, and everyone was certainly drawn to her. Perhaps a bit scared of her, but very much drawn to her. I think we all had a fantastic relationship with our oldies. Children were important, I'm sure, in the household. We did everything together. It wasn't a distinction. It was a very family thing. But the kids were encouraged to do what they wanted to do and enjoy what was here to enjoy. You know, it was a wonderful time.
Standing on a hill, towering over all around it, the Pikedale homestead, an 11-bedroom mansion of brick, timber and stone. Imposing, gracious.
To me it was fairyland. It was as though although there was nothing romantic between us, as though I was brought by a fairy prince to a fairy tale mansion or homestead. If I remember, it was white, and I can remember the roses were mostly red and pink, and a great doorway.
I suppose I'd have to call the house enormous. It didn't seem to me to be that way when I was young because we were so used to it. But it was very big, and I think it was probably only used fully when everybody was there. There must have been many, many bedrooms anyway out of use a lot of the time.
I can remember the oil paintings by Gerald Nathan of all the family around the walls, and the beautiful drapes and the beautiful quietness of it all. And no impropriety, no shouting, no rudeness, no anything. And it was just like a dream world in a dream book.
When we first went there, it was very bare. There were no trees around it at all, and very little garden other than just off the front veranda. There was a little garden there. And Mother, who was a born gardener, she had to extend it. Everything Mother put in grew. She really green fingers. It was a little rocky knob there where the house is, or was, and every time we wanted to put a tree in, you had to blast holes and fill them up with silt from the river to get anything to grow. And also, John, my brother, used to say to her, "Mother, have you got any hoses on?" "No, dear, I've turned them all off." Those were in the balmy days and I was engaged, and he'd say to me, "Hey, go and have a look how many hoses she's got on." I only came back with 9 tonight. She'd be sneaking water. Otherwise, I'd wake up in the morning, go to have a shower, call out, "Okay, there's no water." "Oh, Mother's been watering again."
I remember she broke her back playing tennis at one stage. I don't remember, I was a wee girl. I remember pictures of me on her lap, and here she is in the wheelchair, hosing the garden. So she never lost her interest. The garden seemed to be quite a focal point in the family life. It wasn't just beautiful for anyone to come and see. We used it, it was part of us. So many things happened there. As children, I remember birthday parties. Maybe that was just so the crumbs were kept outside, but it was beaut. You know, we loved being there.
The mansion, the sprawling gardens were impressive, but they were just the setting for the real Pikedale, its people, and a lifestyle that most Australians would only read about in books.
Tennis parties, crowds of people wandering down through the trees and playing tennis and using the garden and enjoying it. It was very much a part of the lifestyle, I feel sure.
We always had to dress for dinner, and when the men came in, they always, if you didn't have a dinner suit, well, you wore a suit.
The feature of Pikedale were the morning teas, when the men would come in from the fields, the paddocks, and Mrs. Rogerson would reign like a queen. A very tall, elegant lady in boned collared dresses, lace, beautiful, impeccable manners, and she poured from a silver teapot and a silver tea service, and always, but always, I can remember sponge cake. Cook had to make sponge cakes with real, of course, cream filling. And they were a feature, the morning and afternoon teas on those wide verandas. I visited, when I was that age, quite elegant homes in Sydney, but I wouldn't have known anything that was as old-fashioned and from another era.
A lot of important people came. They were always asked if they could be brought out here, and they were well entertained to whatever it might be, afternoon tea or the main meal, and it was nearly a popular tourist resort.
Oh, picnics, tennis parties, riding parties. Especially with all your city friends, you get a lot of fun out of them. But there's one picture, I don't know whether you've seen, of a girl riding the horse back to front. She was a city girl. She thought it was great fun, and you knew the horse was quiet, she couldn't come to any harm. Oh no, you had a lot of simple fun like that. We always invariably had the governor there who used to come down to Stanthorpe to open the show. For many years they had their summer holiday residence, I imagine, was in Stanthorpe. But no, we had numerous governors there. The Stanthorpe show was always a must. We had to go to that. Well, everybody went, and you saw a lot of other people from other districts too.
I think there was a great relationship between the townspeople and the Pikedale people. They loved the Rogersons. I feel I had a very great respect for them. And yet they weren't too much on a pedestal. But you'd go to town and I was Miss Millicent, everybody else was, Mr. John or Mr. Colin, my uncles. And there was always a smile and always a cheerful feeling between the people in the town and the property folk.
Races, there were no races in Stanthorpe as such. We used to go to Warwick and Toowoomba and Texas. Texas was a nice outback one. Warwick and Toowoomba, they were good meetings, always good, very good meetings, those. And then we had the dances and the balls afterwards. No, they were good, we enjoyed that.
When Joyce Snelling visited Pikedale in 1928, she was an exuberant 17-year-old, eager for fun and adventure. Her brief stay in what for her was a fairyland left an indelible mark on her. And Joyce left her own mark, a page of Australian cinema history, now stored in our National Archives.
I was there, as I say, for a fortnight, and the only thing I could do was ride, and there seemed to be a lot of space in between when Nancy and I were on horseback. And the family, I think, had recently returned from a trip overseas, and they had a very advanced movie camera and projector for those days. And I'd always loved anything to do with amateur theatricals or acting. I'd always hoped to be an actress, and never was. And I suggested we made a movie. Great horror. No. But however, that night when I got up to the great four-poster bed, I couldn't go to sleep, and I began thinking of the most simple little thing, just a scheme, which I suggested next day. And it still fell on deaf ears, so I thought, now, that John Ramsay's a fine-looking fellow. He'd make a wonderful Indian chief. I began chasing the turkeys round, and I collected enough turkey feathers to make a headdress. I thought, anyway, I'll make a headdress, an Indian headdress. And Nancy was in it with me, but no one else. Anyway, it ended up they agreed. And we made it. It's so simple looking at it now, but it was such tremendous fun. And everyone entered in the spirit of it then. In between the work went on as usual, as it always did at Pikedale. So it just had to be snatched in pre-luncheon bits or after near sundown or in early morning. It's a very simple little movie, but it gave us a great deal of fun. And to think after 50 years that it's come out of the archives, it isn't destroyed, and here it is. I can remember making fish. In one scene we had to, Nancy and I were fishing, and disaster. The fish didn't go down because they're made of cardboard, and they floated gaily on the top while we caught them. like him, so out of character with him, the antics as an Indian chief, that to us it was terribly funny. Look, she gave him a good kick, you see. Ah, two of us on the horse. Pull down the frock. Don't show a knee. Yes. I can remember saying, where will we go now? What will we do? It was as impromptu as that. Up he gets. Oh, on goes the hat again, even though he's numbed and stunned. Into the shadows, you see. Now, Nancy was saying, kiss her, and they wouldn't do it. And they wouldn't put his arm around me, so I just had to put into the shadows. It was terribly romantic. I don't think that would do the young people of today, would it?
In the world of Pikedale, there was the mundane. There were times when the land could be an unruly mistress. Times of hard work and worry. The privileges of their lifestyle were to be earned. And there were other rewards, a chance to venture far beyond the boundary fences, to broaden one's horizons.
Colin I think he bought the camera in Germany. And he bought it mainly for John because John couldn't come for the trip, and he loved taking pictures, so he thought it was a very good thing for him to do, and we had the joy of it over there, and able to bring the pictures back for the family of all the relations and everywhere we'd been, and more or less what we'd done. That was a trip we took in 1926.
The 20s, the 30s, and later. For the world outside Pikedale, times of great change, of blossoming technology with its promise of a brave new world, and times of social bewilderment, confusion, and despair. The Rogersons were insulated from much of it. They had each other, Pikedale, and wool, the golden fleece. But they couldn't escape the reality of the Depression. It came to them in human terms, the desperate faces of an army of hungry and disillusioned men on the road, drifting, searching, just surviving.
Yes, plenty of them. Carrying a suitcase and thin-soled shoes, and as soon as they got to you, could you give us a pair of boots or something to wear on? They had no idea. They'd just gone with whatever they had, no idea of a swag or anything like that. No, it was rather pathetic to see, really. But we got a lot of them through there, tremendous lot. You always gave the bagmen, as they were called in those days, always gave them tea, sugar, flour and a bit of meat. One day the butcher, the man came and said to him, I want some loin chops. He said, I haven't got any loin chops. I can give you a flap, as we called it. The man said he wasn't going to have that sort of meat. He wanted loin chops. And the butcher picked up the flap and threw it at him. He grabbed it and he's still running.
It's an interesting thing to see now, but I feel my uncle was really a diarist using his movie camera. Whether he intended this or not, I don't know, but it's shown a magnificent picture of life in those days. He seemed to have been able to capture everything, you know, from us kids playing in the garden, from the workings in the sheds, the drenching, the shearing, you name it, and then the family life. And it's really made a wonderful picture for us and for everybody. It might have been royalty arriving at the station or the swaggy wandering up the road. Whatever it was, every bit of it seems to somehow have he's used his camera instead of his pen.
I don't think he did it intentionally. He just would say, as things happened, he'd say, oh, that's worth taking a snap of. So he'd hop in and get the camera. Oh, that's right, I'd get the camera. And he took everything of interest that happened on the place and everywhere we went.
Yet John Rogerson doesn't seem to have recorded an important part of the Pikedale story, a remarkable act of generosity. It was in 1941. Children in coastal schools had become refugees from the fear of war. The Rogersons moved out of their home, and for 2 years the grand old mansion became St Hilda's Girls' School, late of Southport. By war's end, the Rogersons were back in residence, and their lifestyle continued. But cruel winds of change were beginning to blow, whistling through the family's cracked insularity. There was no room for gentility in the turbulent 40s and 50s. What had been special would soon become just old-fashioned, and finally would be no more.
After I left school and I was living up here, we had more or less come to an end of an era. The lifestyle on the place was beautiful, but it didn't apply to other lifestyles that we knew at that time. We still wore evening dresses for dinner. People were stunned, I think, when they realised this, but I remember having a selection. I could go to the organdy, the taffeta, the blue or the pink or whatever every night. I just automatically dressed in my long frock and down we came to dinner. And it was probably the only place left out of the bigger properties around that had this feeling still. Maybe because there weren't a great crowd of young children living permanently there, although we all came a lot. They didn't have the problem of having to cope with them, and so the old habits still continued.
It's very sad. It's wonderful to look back on, but it's sad to think that your children and your grandchildren won't have that wonderful life to look back on. All the people that were there, they're all gone, so you forget it. It couldn't be now as it was then. The places have been cut up, all the old families have gone. It wouldn't be the same at all.
Well, I often wonder what happened to Pikedale. It seems incredible that a way of life, an era, can disappear so quickly. We were in those days a very definite entity. We didn't need anybody else or anything else, I don't think. No matter what was going on in the outside world, Pikedale just went on as ever. And that era went on. And so I wonder it was my grandmother's death that really ended it. She was such a focal point, and we still clung to those old ways of life while she was about. And she was the heart and core of it all, I feel. And then when she died, the whole spirit of it all seemed to disappear.